So before we get started, I want to share a quick story. I can't tell you how many food founders I met who are doing everything right on the surface. They have a great product, customers love it, sales are coming in, and behind the scenes, they're stuck. They're not sure if their recipe will actually scale. They don't know if their cost will hold once volume increases. They're wondering if retail is the next step, or if they're moving too soon could hurt their business. And almost every time, the problem isn't effort or passion. It's that they don't have the clarity on where they are in the scaling journey. That's exactly why I created the Scale Up in Retail Readiness quiz. If you're not sure whether your food product is truly ready to scale, I've created the Scale Up in Retail Readiness quiz to help you get clarity. In just 3 minutes, you'll see where you stand and what to focus on next to grow your food business the right way. You can take the quiz through the link in the show notes. So let's dive into the episode today.
If your business has a single point of failure, you don't have a supply chain, you have a countdown timer. And most food founders don't realize where that timer is ticking. It's not in their marketing, it's not in their product, it's not in their supply, it's in their supplier strategy. So today I'm going to walk you through why having a secondary supplier is no longer optional and how one overlooked decision can quietly take your product off the shelf. And I'll also share what the most prepared founders are doing differently to protect their growth. So for a long time, founders thought of a secondary supplier as a backup, and even in the food industry. So something you only need just in case, right? But that thinking has changed. So in 2026, the strongest food brands are not just building for survival, they're building for leverage and total value. Because when you rely on a single supplier, you lose something critical. That's visibility. You can't compare quality, you can't compare pricing and lead times. But when you introduce a secondary supplier, something shifts. You gain control. Companies using dual sourcing have been shown to reduce delivery risks by up to 60% and achieve cost savings of 12 to 23%. So not because they are buying more, not because they are no longer dependent. I call this competitive redundancy. You're not paying for a backup. You're planning for leverage, and your supplier behaves differently when they know that you're not the only option. It's very true. Like when I speak to suppliers and I can tell them I have another supplier, it's completely different. Now it's competing. They're now like competing for the same business. So most founders think the risk is my supplier might fail, but that's not the real risk. The real risk is timing, because disruption doesn't happen when you're ready, right? It happens when you're scaling. When you have orders to fulfill, when you're committed to retailers. And in today's environment, disruption is no longer rare. We have extreme weather conditions, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical shifts. These are now part of the daily operations, unfortunately. So let me ask you this. If your primary supplier stopped delivering next month, and I'm talking about like your key ingredient in this case, what would happen to your business? Most founders don't have a clear answer to that. And that's where the exposure is, because retail doesn't pause for your supply chain. Earlier, I mentioned that supply chain isn't just about disruption. It's all about fit. Different retailers and markets have different requirements. So I'm talking about certification standards and then compliance expectation. And many founders build their entire supply chain around one supplier until one day, a retailer asks, do you meet this certification? And the answer is no. Not because your product isn't good, but because your supplier doesn't meet that requirement. Now you have a decision, and you know what? You lose the opportunity, or rebuild your supply chain under pressure in that case, because now you're just scrambling to get somebody that can provide you what you need or what your retailer is asking for. So, but founders who have a secondary supplier don't face that problem. Like if you have somebody on your back pocket, what do? they pivot, they shift production, they move forward. That's revenue protection right there. There's another layer to this that most founders don't consider, and it's not risk, it's not opportunity. Different suppliers don't just provide the same ingredient; they provide different capabilities. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about like the different processing methods that they're utilizing, different textures, different functional performance, and one supplier might be better for beverages, another might be better for bars or baked goods if those are the things that you're working with. And when you rely on one supplier, you're locked into their limitations as well, right? When you work with multiple suppliers, you expand your possibility. You're not just managing supply, you're expanding your product potential. And I'm also talking to the emerging ones, because sometimes you can try to limit yourself based on your volume that you're supplying right now, but this is part of being the proactive food founder and looking ahead. So many founders think I'll figure out a secondary supplier later, but here's the problem. You don't build suppliers relationship during a crisis. Unfortunately, you don't do that. You build them before you need them, because when disruption happens, you don't have time to vet, you don't have time to test your product against those ingredients, and you don't have time to negotiate either. And this is where brands lose momentum, or worse, they lose their place on the shelf, and that can be a huge problem. Here's what I want to leave you with. Do not wait for a crisis to think about a secondary supplier. Start now. And if you're not sure where to begin, I've created a simple resource to help you think through this strategically. It walks you through what to look for when identifying and evaluating a secondary supplier for your key ingredients. You can download it through the link in the show notes, because this is not something you want to figure out under pressure. No, you don't want that. And if, as you're listening to this, you're realizing that there are multiple areas in your business where you need more structure, whether it's sourcing, manufacturing, margins, or overall readiness, that's exactly why I created the Emerging Food Business Hub. It's designed for founders who have moved past the idea stage, have a product that works, but want guidance and support as they build their systems behind their business, especially if you're not quite ready yet for a full intensive program like a retail readiness. But you don't want to navigate this stage alone too. You want some help and you want some community. So at the beginning of the episode, I said, if your business has a single point of failure, you don't have a supply chain. You have a countdown timer. Now you know where that timer is. And more importantly, you know how to remove it, because scaling a food business is not just about building demand. It's about building resilience behind the product. And your supply chain is where that resilience begins. So I leave you with that this week. And until next week, keep scaling your food business.
Here to help you get clear on where your business is today and what to focus on next. So thanks for spending the time with me today. Until next week, keep scaling your food business.